Hi, my name is Miss Leeves and I teach English and Media at Van Dyke. I've been at Van Dyke for about 4 years in January, and I'm really looking forward to meeting you all in September. I'm going to read the next section of The Wall and I hope you're enjoying it. I climb straight into the shower before anyone can see the scratches on my arms. The steaming water drumming against my aching shoulders is hypnotically pleasurable. As the hot jets pummel my skin, I feel as if I can sense my muscles digesting the wild bout of axe swinging, recovering and building up, readying themselves for the next test. I stand dripping on the bath mat and examine my arms. With the dried blood washed away, the scratches aren't too visible. I run a finger along the small raised wounds, then give my forearm a squeeze, clenching my fist. It feels hard and ripples under my touch and I wriggle my fingers. My hands too look different, wider with a bulge at the base of my thumb and rough fingertips. In the steamed up mirror, I look at my hazy outline, still skinny but less so, as if my hands, arms and shoulders are leading me towards a new shape. When I come out of the bathroom wrapped in a towel, Livy's standing there in the corridor as if he's waiting for me. I need to talk to you, man to man, he says. I try not to roll my eyes, but I think my eyeballs do it anyway, on their own. What? I think of you as a man now. Do you realise that? I need to get dressed. Come in here. I have something important to say. Livy grips my arm and leads me back into the bathroom. He locks the door, puts the toilet lid down and sits. With an open palm, he indicates that he wants me to take a seat on the edge of the bath. The room is still steamy from the shower and I'm almost naked, and this is possibly the strangest thing Leeves has ever done. I stand there looking down at him and wonder if he's finally lost it. I almost tell him that if he needs the toilet we can talk later, somewhere else. But I get the feeling he'd take it the wrong way. I sit tucking the towel firmly around myself. I think you know what this is about, he says. The sound of the whirring fan fills the room. I have no idea what to say, but Leeves doesn't wait for a response. In a word, he continues, responsibility. Okay, one word. That was easy. I stand and take a step to the door. Sit, says Leeves, not shouting, not even cross. Please. He smiles at me, a look so strange and unfamiliar it somehow makes me step back and sit. I can almost see the effort in his straining cheek muscles. I didn't get you here to argue. I just want to talk to you about your mother. Mum? Yes. What about her? She's a brave woman. You understand what she's been through, don't you? I shrug. You understand what grief does to a person and how her faith has helped her through. I know about grief, I snap. I know about that. Of course you do. Of course, in many ways you're a very mature young man, but in other ways I think you need to consider her feelings. I think you need to understand what you're doing to her. What I'm doing to her. You're hurting her very much. What are you talking about? I understand exactly what you're going through, Joshua. No, you don't. How at your age the body goes through a lot of changes and a man begins to feel differently towards his mother. I'm beginning to think it's lucky we're in the bathroom, because any minute now I might puke. But I think it's time you consider taking her feelings into account. What feelings? This is really sick. I have to get dressed. I stand again, but Leeves gets up quicker than me and blocks my path to the doorway. We're suddenly too close, locked in this room, him fully clothed, me almost naked. The fan clicks itself off and the room fills with an eerie silence. You know exactly what I'm talking about. You want to be a grown-up, great, be a grown-up, face up to what you're doing. I'm not doing anything. Do you need me to spell it out? Spell what out? The secrecy, the lying, the sneaking off, the shutting her out, the disrespect. Treating this house like a hotel and her as your servant. Is that clear enough for you? Oh, it's me that treats her like a servant. I'm not here to argue, Joshua. I've said my piece. He swivels and sidesteps away from the door. I know I ought to fight back, tell him what I really think of him, tell him all the ways he's crushed my mother and sucked the life out of our family. But there's something about him that makes it impossible to say the truth. If I had my clothes on, maybe I'd give it a try. But like this, wearing only a towel, I can't face up to him. I unlock the door and walk away. We eat dinner in near silence, Liev and Mum alternating between falsely chirpy attempts to draw me into conversation and equally strained efforts to talk to one another as if I'm not there. I wear a long sleeve top so Mum doesn't see the scratches. I can have a leg missing and Liev wouldn't notice. He makes a couple of barbed compliments about how fast I'm growing up, which are his version of a nudge in the back, a reminder to act on what he said to me, but I don't even look at him. Later, I lie rigidly awake in bed, trying to think my way towards a dream of that aeroplane sitting there next to my dad, but the dream never comes and the clarity of the vision dissolves. For a week, I think I've given up on the olive grove. For a week, I tried to banish the place and the people who own it from my thoughts. But then it's Friday again and school ends and there's only one place I want to go. As I walk out of Amaris, I notice that my pace is faster than usual. I'm in a hurry. I can see the top terrace in my mind's eye exactly as I left it. The axe not even returned to the tarpaulin, the shards of wood everywhere, the gloves tossed down any old how. The first thing will be to clear up, get all of the mess out of the grove. I'll then need the axe again to dig out the stump. When I've done that, I'll start on the next bush. Then when I've done the bushes, I'll fix the collapsed wall. I'll work even harder than before and I'll go there every Friday and eventually he'll come. In time he'll recover and he'll come. He'll come and see my work and his heart will lift with joy and surprise, and something between us that appears utterly unfixable will, in that moment, seem a little less broken. I can't bring the trees back to life, but I can repair the terrace. I can get it looking how it would have looked before the wall cut the grove off from its owner. Maybe I could even plant new trees. It was supposed to be possible to take cuttings from plants to grow new ones. I knew that, and if I did enough research, maybe I'd be able to find out how to take a branch from one of the lower trees and grow it on the top terrace. Or better still, since there wasn't enough water for lemons, perhaps I could take a cutting from one of the olive trees. Even if it took years to produce a crop, even if its chances of survival were small, that didn't mean the effort was pointless. Those big old trees had been planted by someone once. Planting a tree was never futile. To grow a tree was a gesture of belief on a time scale longer than a human lifespan. That's how Leela's dad talked about the grove. He said the land was his father's and his father's father's, and he was looking after it for his sons. If I planted a new tree, there might be no olives for him, but he'd know it was for his son and his son's son, or maybe even for Leela and her children. It was worth trying just for that, to show that I understood what he said, understood what this land meant to him, and wanted in some minuscule way to resist the theft of it. Just as his olive trees predated the wall by perhaps hundreds of years, one day in the future the wall might be demolished, but a tree I planted could still be there, tended by a descendant of Leela's father, someone who'd have no idea who had put the tree into the soil, someone who might not know where there was ever a time when this land was walled off. This unborn person would pick my olives, taste them on his tongue. He'd share them with his family, cook with the oil, perhaps take a cutting and grow another tree. I wouldn't give up. I would clear the top terrace, and in the straggly shade of dead trees I would plant. However long it took, one day Leela's father or her brother or Leah herself would see and they'd understand. I start going to the olive grove almost every day after school, and it takes me 3 weeks to clear the top field of thorn bushes. Hacking down the branches proves to be the easy bit. Everyone has a dense clump of roots that grip the hard, dry soil with amazing tenacity. Pulling at the stump is pointless. Levering with the axe loosens it but does nothing to get the thing out of the ground. The only way is to dig a hole all the way around and go under where the roots are thin enough to split with a spade, hacking at the thicker ones with the axe. Each bush leaves behind a trench big enough to bury a dog. If I only wanted the field to look good, I could just cut off the stumps at ground level, but I know that to replant the terrace it's important to get out all the roots. When I refill the holes, there's never enough soil and I'm left with strange indentations, but I use tarpaulin to drag in extra soil from outside the grove and flatten out the ground. I searched carefully to source the best soil, but away from the spring, the ground is so rocky it isn't easy to find anything at all. I Google olive tree planting and the results are disheartening. It is possible to grow a tree from a cutting, but the procedure is technical and complicated. A cutting will only grow roots if it's dipped in a hormone powder or some kind of special acid. You then have to plant it in something called rooting media, monitor the temperature and keep the leaves wet with a misting machine. Even then it takes more than 2 months for enough roots to grow to let you plant it outdoors. There's no way I'd be able to do that. The time wasn't a problem, but it would be impossible to get hold of that equipment, and even if I could, there was nowhere to grow the cuttings without Mum and Leeves noticing. But one sentence on the same webpage catches my eye. Apparently you can't grow a tree from the pip of an olive you get in a jar because the brine kills the seed, and even without the brine very few seeds grow. But over long periods of time, a mature tree drops olives which rot down and produce seedlings. The page has a picture of one of these seedlings. I blow up the image until the small picture fills the whole screen. I stare and stare at it, committing the exact look of the plant to memory. Young trees, it turns out, need frequent irrigation, but that's not a problem. I can do it. If I can find one of these seedlings anywhere at the grove, I can plant an olive tree. After uprooting the thorn bushes and before dealing with the other weeds, I crawl over every centimetre of the olive grove looking for one of these seedlings. I spend an entire afternoon inching back and forth on my hands and knees hunting for a baby tree. When I've looked over the whole field with no success, I do it again more carefully. Still nothing. I'm disappointed but not surprised. The field has been weeded and ploughed by Leela's father, and over the last weeks I've kept up the weeding myself, zapping anything that might take water from the trees. I searched the perimeter right up to the cracks in the wall, hunting for any tiny plant that might have been overlooked, but there's nothing. My plan already seems to have failed. Then, as I lean on the wall, looking out over the dry ground, a flash of green catches my eye. Where the overspill from the irrigation pool drains out, a tiny delta of greenery is clinging to the hillside. I leap over the wall, my heart pounding. I throw myself to the ground and begin to search meticulously through the leaves, stalks and stubby little walnuts of grass. Then, in a rocky crack, my eye lights on a stem no thicker than a worm, topped by 2 minuscule leaves. I can barely believe what I'm seeing. For a few moments I stare at it in silence, mentally flicking from this seedling in front of me to the picture I memorised. Then my screams can hold themselves in no longer. I leap into the air, toss my head backwards and yell for sheer joy, dancing around the plant, flailing my arms and legs, whooping and shouting and screaming until my throat gives up on me. I have found one! I can dig it up, transplant it, water it, care for it, grow it. My work cleaning the field has not been for nothing, and then Leela's father eventually comes. I'll guide him through the perfectly tended olive grove and the lower 2 terraces of watered lemon trees, and then, just when he's beginning to get over his surprise, I'll be able to take him up to the top field and show him my sapling, our sapling. With trembling hands I run for the spade, but falter as I pick it up. All that crawling around looking for the seedling has warped my sense of scale. The spade in my hands feels implausibly vast. This is not the right tool for digging something tiny and fragile out of a rocky crevice, and there's no room for error. I have to wait. The seedling has survived this long. It isn't going to die overnight. I have to come back with a trowel. I can take the one Mum uses for the front garden. I'll be able to return it before she notices. Or maybe even that might be too large and clumsy. I decide I'll bring a spoon and a knife. This job isn't farming, it's surgery. I prepare the hole first, no bigger than my fist, dug into the loose soil where I removed a bush, central on the top terrace, with some shade from above. I pre-water it and leave a full bottle by the side of the hole, alongside a small heap of dark, composty earth taken from our front garden and brought out in a plastic bag hidden in my pocket. The seedling has a slightly bent stalk from growing sideways out of the slope, then upward towards the light. It is rooted right up against one of the edge of a crack in the rock, so the whole thing can't be dug out in a complete ball of soil. I take the knife, one of Leeves' steak knives, and cut along the surface of the rock, prizing away the soil. I then saw a circle not much bigger than a tennis ball and leave it in the trough as deep as it will go. Pinching my fingers around the tiny stem to hold it in its soil, I press downwards and then a twist, free it from the rock. It comes loose at the first attempt, and I slowly stand, holding my precious cargo with both hands. I don't want to risk clambering over the wall, so I walk the long way round to the entrance and carefully climb the steps, one by one, taking care not to slip or stumble. Kneeling at the fresh, neat hole, I edge the olive seedling into its new home, pushing a few crumbs of soil underneath to raise it to the correct height. Bit by bit, I gently press soil around it with my fingertips. With a bottle full to the brim, I can't get the nozzle low enough to the ground without risking a gush that might harm the plant. So I pour single handfuls into my left hand and tip them at the base of the stem, watching each one puddle and disappear before adding more. When I've finished, I just stare at it in the way a new parent might gaze at their sleeping baby. Nothing I've achieved in life has ever made me feel happy as this two-leaved stalk. It's not quite vertical, but that doesn't matter. It will straighten up in time, and even if it remains crooked, I don't care. To me, as long as it stays alive, it will always be perfect. I'm going to look after you, I say. I promise. The words just come out. I know it's stupid to talk to plants, but I don't care. This is my place. No one can see me or hear me. I can do what I want. If I feel like talking to my tree, I talk to my tree. With my seedling in the ground, safely transplanted, I find myself daydreaming about the olive grove more often than ever. During the school day, I have to fight to keep my attention on the books in front of me. My mind constantly drifts off, back to the field, back to my tree and to the tasks I hope to complete before the first Friday of July, when Leah's father might visit. That date is burned into my mind. I can't stop thinking about it, hoping he comes, imagining all the different reactions he might have to the work I've done on his fields. In all but one version, he's delighted. The fantasy reaction that scares me is one where he becomes angry, accuses me of trying to take over his land, and I can't explain myself. It'll be 4 weeks since his last pass, 7 weeks since the attack. Even more frightening than a negative reaction is the possibility that he doesn't come at all. If there's no visit this time, he must be in dire trouble. When the day comes, I more or less sprint out of school and head straight for the grove. I've now weeded the top field so thoroughly that the only living thing in the ground is my seedling, sitting in a meticulously nurtured bed of moist, dark soil, its 2 leaves rinsed and glistening. After clearing and weeding the terrace, the last remaining job was the collapsed wall. For a while I thought maybe I'd be able to rebuild it, but when I saw how intricately constructed the walls were and discovered how hard it was to fit the stones together, I realised this was beyond me. Instead, I picked a corner of the field and carried the rocks over there one by one to make a neat stack. This took a whole afternoon and left me so stiff and sore that for a few days I moved like an old man. But as I hurry out on this terrifying and thrilling Friday, I notice that my suppleness has returned. I can stride fast, my legs pumping smoothly against the ground. The walk to the grove, which once seemed like an arduous trek, now feels easy, even in the heat of high summer. I want to give the pile of stones a quick tidy and check that the soil under the rockfall is clear and smooth, but other than that, I'm ready for Leela's father's visit. Leeves' gloves have fallen apart, but it doesn't matter. My hands are tough now, tanned and strong, workers' hands, man's hands. The rest of me feels different too. My clothes are tighter than they were, around my thighs, shoulders and chest. I've changed the grove, and the grove is changing me. The longer I spend there, the more protective and proud I feel of my fields. I've taken to pacing over each of the terraces, usually in bare feet, for the simple pleasure of feeling the soil against my skin. I walk slowly and soundlessly, examining every tree, listening to the sounds of the wind and the wildlife, the occasional squeaks and rustles of lizards and mice, the ratcheting of the crickets, perhaps the scurry and flap of a surprised bird, and always in the background the trickle of spring water replenishing the pond. An hour can easily pass watching a line of ants bustle to and fro, seeing how they react to miniature catastrophe of a stick scraped across their route. Time behaves differently at the grove. I can start to strip a leaf back to its veins, tearing out each tiny segment of flesh one by one, and by the time I finish, the perimeter wall might be casting an extra foot of shade across the ground. What this means in hours and minutes, I don't seem to care. I spent a large chunk of one afternoon gathering handspan-sized sticks and building a tiny pyramid, a little wigwam held up only by perfect balance. At the grove, there's nothing to do and everything to do. I'm never bored. As the amount of upkeep and restoration work decreases, I continue to spend as much time there as ever. I just want to be at the olive grove. When I have the choice, why would I go anywhere else? I never vary my method of watering the trees. Each tree gets a precise amount, half a bucket. I give them their water in 2 pours, each one distributed in a careful O all the way around. As I wait for the first helping to soak into the soil, I put one hand on the trunk and say, I bring you water, I bring you water. I don't know why I do it this way. It's a system that simply evolved, but now feels like some kind of sacred ritual from which I can't deviate. I never feel calmer or more content than during the watering of the trees. I always finish with a handful or 2 for my own seedling then. Without saying anything, I touch each trunk on the top terrace. There's no point watering them, but those dead trees are still part of the grove, so I feel they should be included in the ceremony. I love those trees no less than the ones below. The way they are dead, but still there, reminds me of my father. In the grove, I feel his presence more strongly than anywhere. I'm a long walk from the town, a long walk from any other human beings, but I never feel alone. Sometimes I press myself close against the tallest of the dead trees, feeling the rough bark against my cheek. I hurry into the grove, thinking Leah's father might be there already, but he isn't. I make a few final preparations and pace through the terraces, trying to calm down, to prepare myself for his arrival, but slowly, as the afternoon sun thickens the air, I feel my excitement thickening and restless energy draining away. By mid-afternoon, I've more or less given up hope and I'm half asleep, leaning heavily against an olive tree, when I begin to think I might be hearing the sound of footsteps. I jump to my feet and run up to the top level. From there, I can just see down to the razor wire at the turn-off to the grove. Intermittent sections of road along the empty walled field are visible, and sure enough, flickering in and out of vision is the head of a man in a black and white headscarf. I can't make out the face, and the figure looks somehow older than I remember Leela's father. Slower and more stooped, but my heart immediately begins to pound with hope and excitement. It has to be him. I leap to my feet and run down to greet him, but after only a few steps I realise that I want to see his true, honest reaction to the appearance of his fields. There will be plenty of time later for everything else. The most important thing is to just watch his face as he walks in and sees my work. I turn back to the top terrace and lie down on my belly, choosing a spot where I'll be invisible from below. My heart is beating with such insistent thuds that I can feel it moving inside me, like a tiny trapped animal as I listen to the slow, shuffling approach of the man. I can tell by the scrape of his feet in the dust that he's wearing sandals. When he walks through the entrance to the grove, I see for the first time that he isn't alone. He is leaning on the arm of a smaller figure who wasn't visible above the height of the wall, Leela. But more surprising than the presence of Leela is the sight of her father when he pulls down his headscarf in the shade of the grove. It is him and it isn't him. He looks like a different man. One cheek is covered by a purple and yellow bruise which spreads all the way to his jaw, and his nose is hidden behind a white plaster bridge. Both lips look swollen by a diagonal scar which cuts across his mouth, and a stripe the width of a hand has been shaved along one side of his head. Stubbly tufts of hair have begun to grow back in the stripe, which is rigid with surgical stitches. Tears prickle at my eyes and begin to seep down my cheeks. I wipe them away thoroughly with the base of my thumb, trying not to sniff, hoping to remain unobserved a little longer. As if by some strange telepathy, At the same moment, Leela's father makes an identical movement with his hand, brushing a tear from his cheek. He looks stunned, his body seeming to vibrate with shock or perhaps disbelief. He staggers forwards and Leela rushes to help him, but he waves her away. She steps back to the entrance of the grove and hovers awkwardly, looking more anxious than pleased. Without making a sound, I watch as he examines his trees one by one, poking a finger into the moist soil at their base, putting a hand tenderly on each trunk as you might pat a loyal dog. He inspects every tree closely, from the soil up to the leaves, inching across his land, climbing slowly from terrace to terrace. He's close to me now, so close I can hear his breathing, but still he doesn't notice me looking down from above. Leela watches him intently, but doesn't move from her position by the entrance. When he's inspected every tree, he slumps to the ground like a marathon runner crossing the finishing line, utterly spent. I almost rush down and show myself, but something tells me to wait a little longer, something in the way he's holding his body as if he's fighting an invisible force. A moment later, he isn't fighting anymore, and his chest begins to surge and heave with sobs, the kind that burst through when you've been holding back with all your strength until the moment when the pressure is too much and your defences crack and it all just floods out. I recognise the feeling, but I've never seen it take over anyone else. I never even knew it could happen to an adult. Leela walks up the steps and sits next to him, but she doesn't speak and doesn't touch him. I watch and wait until he's finished. When enough time has passed for me to pretend I haven't witnessed his tears, I stand and walk down to where he's sitting. As I approach in my bare feet, they both stare at me with pure bafflement on their features. I can think of nothing to say, and neither, it seems, can they. I hold out my water bottle. Tentatively, reluctantly, almost, he takes the bottle and drinks. He stands, struggling to his feet without taking his eyes off me, and opens his mouth. No sound comes out and he closes it again. Come, I say, follow me. Leela stares, her jaw slack, her eyes wide. Come, I say to her. She takes her father's arm and I lead them towards the top terrace. He looks more confused than ever as he struggles behind me up the loose stone steps. When he sees the cleared field, he freezes. I walk ahead and squat on my hunches, showing them my tiny seedling sitting in its moist circle of rich soil. He stumbles towards me, head bends stiffly, and reaches out to touch the underside of a leaf with his little finger. After gazing for a while at this baby tree, we stand and stare at one another. I am smiling now, but his bruised face seems poised between puzzlement and suspicion. Why? He says after a long silence. I shrug and almost begin to laugh as I realise that even though I have imagined this moment hundreds of times, rehearsing endless variations, it has never occurred to me to think of an answer to this question. I shake my head vacantly, trying to fight the grin that is spreading across my face. Tell me why, he insists, a hint of anger entering his voice. For you, I say. For me? You saved me, and I saw what they did to you. You saw. I wanted to turn back, but I ran away. I'm sorry. It was my fault. A second ago, I was almost dancing with pride and excitement. Now quite a different feeling seems to leap up and grab me by the throat. Without any warning, tears spring from my eyes and my throat tightens, cutting off any further attempt to speak. But it's a strange sensation because I don't feel upset. The joy of being here with Leela and her father, showing them my work, is still singing in my veins, except some more powerful force has now swept through, and I realise that it's relief. Only now, seeing Leela's father safe and alive, can I face the depth of my terror at what might have happened to him. If he hadn't survived, his death would have been my fault. Only standing in front of him, looking at him in the eye, knowing he is all right, do I realise that I've been carrying around a cold sense of dread for weeks, locked inside me, a lethal poison in a fragile bottle. He looks at me, watching me cry, and I sense that he understands what I'm thinking. I don't notice Leela going or come back, but she appears beside me, holding out the water bottle, which is full to the brim and glistening with droplets from the spring. I drink and the flow of tears subsides. Leela's father reaches out and touches me on the cheek with a strange and particular gesture, laying the back of his 4 fingers against my face and brushing my cheekbone twice with his thumb. Good, he says. Just that. To drink is good. To cry is good. What you have done in my olive grove is good. You are good? I have no idea which of these he means, but this is his only comment on my work. We spend the next hour in the grove together. He teaches me how to prune the olive trees, pointing out the importance of cutting back the young stems that sprout near the base of each trunk. For good shape, he keeps saying, and I nod as if I understand. He shows me a particular pattern to plough into the soil around each tree for maximum water absorption and demonstrates, as if it is of particular importance, a procedure using a rusty metal hook which keeps the spring unblocked and ensures a steady flow of water. When this is done, we sit all three in a row, leaning against a shaded wall. He produces 2 apples from his pocket and hands me one. I try to refuse. I can get home quickly and eat as much as I want, but every refusal just makes him more adamant, so I take it and eat half. It's the best apple I've ever tasted, crisp and sweet, but I hand an uneaten half back and he reluctantly accepts it, handing the gnawed hemisphere on to Leela. He tells me he thought there would be lots of work to do, and he's too ill to do it all himself, which is why he brought Leela. He says it would be impossible to get a pass for any of his sons, but Leela is a good worker. It's strange, he says, sucking a fragment of apple from between his teeth, just to sit and relax. It's a beautiful place, I say. Yes, of course, he replies. After she finishes her apple, Leela begins a long and impassioned speech in her language. I can't understand any of the words, but I can tell she's asking her father for something, begging him, and that he refuses and refuses, but she keeps on going, and eventually he gives way. She kisses him on his unbruised cheek and jumps to her feet. Come, she says, I want to show you something. I stand, brushing the dust from my trousers. What is it? A place. Where? A secret place. I used to go there all the time. My mother took me. Your mother? Yes, before the war we came together, all of us, and my brothers would help with the work, but I was too small. So my mother used to take me to this place. Where is it? Just follow me. She turns on her heel and walks out of the grove, almost running. Just outside the entrance, she picks out a thin path so overgrown I've never even noticed it was there. She rushes forwards, twisting her body this way and that to dodge between thorny branches that have now grown across it. I squeeze into my shoes and follow, scratching my legs in the effort to keep up. A high rocky outcrop looms over the grove, and as we emerge from the patch of bushes into the steep, barren yellow-grey land, sparsely dotted with weeds and cacti, she picks out a route skirting upwards along the bottom of the rock face. She goes too fast for me to stay alongside her, and the path is narrow, so we don't speak. I just follow her up and up, watching the agile and deft placement of her feet on the loose, stony ground, stepping where she steps and keeping close. I'm sweaty and out of breath, and we emerge on a smooth, rocky plateau, not much bigger than a dining table, sheltered by a jagged overhang. Leela stands on the lip of the precipice, looking out at the view below of the olive grove, the road to Amaris, the wall, the miles and miles of land stretching to a shimmering horizon. I can't believe it, she says, drinking in deep lungfuls of air. I stand watching her, not knowing what to say. She's right in front of me, but feels far away, lost in private thoughts. Eventually she turns. Her face is glowing with happiness, a huge grin spread across her features. Until this moment, she has always appeared to be a serious, watchful person, but it suddenly seems as if this girl is smiling at me now is perhaps the real her. What can't you believe, I say? That I'm here again, because you usually have to work? Work where? At the olive grove. No, I hardly ever get to our grove either. I only got the permit because my father is sick. Oh. And even if I do get to the grove, I'm never allowed up here. It's too dangerous. I look down at the lethal drop. But you came here when you were small. It was safe then. What do you mean? Amaris was just starting. Your people stayed near their homes. There weren't so many guns. With a dizzying metal swerve, I realise what she means. The danger isn't the rock face, It's the people of Amaris. Could you come here with your father or your brothers? I ask. She shakes her head. If you meet the wrong person out here, it's not safe. But it's okay with me. You want me to thank you? She snaps, almost snarling out the words. No, I say quickly as I can. Not at all. I'm just trying to understand. I mean, I should thank you for bringing me here. It's beautiful. She nods. Come. She sits on the ground, her legs poking outwards into the thin air, and pats the rock next to her. I edge forwards, trying not to show my fear of the drop, and sit alongside her. She looks out at the view, devouring it with her eyes. I want to just stare at her mysterious, pristine, beautiful face, but I know I can't, so I sit as she sits, balancing myself with my hands planted behind me, staring outwards at the land, my body humming with awareness of the thin barrier of air between us. A delicious, comfortable silence keeps us company. You used to come here all the time, I say after a while. Yes, before the wall. And now? It's been more than a year. Since you went to the olive grove. Since I went anywhere. It's too difficult. You haven't gone anywhere. You haven't left your town. I know the astonishment in my voice is rude, insensitive, ignorant, but the words tumble out, shrill and gormless, before I can censor myself. Let's not talk about it, she says, throwing me a quick, acid glance. There's a flash of emotion in her eyes I've never seen before, a spark of something wild and furious but under control. Sorry, I say, hoping we can get back to the friendly silence of just a few moments earlier, but it seems to have slipped away. The fact of who I am and where I live is fizzing and crackling between us, impossible to ignore. You must be very angry, I say. She doesn't look at me. Her voice is flat as she says, if you were angry all the time, it would kill you. And if you were never angry, that would kill you too. You have to have somewhere to put it, and you have to know when to let it out. As long as you are in control, it's okay. You have to keep control. I can't think of any answer except to mumble, I couldn't do that. You'd learn. I'm not special. There's no choice, but let's not talk about it today. Not today, not here. She spins back from the ledge and stands, and I stand too, and I watch as she closes her eyes, turns her face to the sky, and breathes deep and long over and over, pulling the air into her lungs like a rare and delicious chocolate to be tasted and savoured, one moment at a time. While her eyes are shut and I can stare without embarrassment, it's her lips that pull hardest at my gaze, the curve of them where they meet, their soft, moist redness, the gap between them where they're slightly parted, showing a glimpse of tooth. As I stare at her mouth, my heartbeat accelerates. We are alone. I could take a single step and kiss her. I could taste those lips with mine. I could breathe her air, touch her, stroke her skin, smell her hair, and kiss her perfect mouth. And I sense, in an overpowering instant, that she'd let me, that perhaps she might even want it. Her eyes snap open and she turns towards me as if she knows what I'm thinking. For an instant, we seem to float free of the rock, upwards from the land, the two of us utterly alone, loosening ourselves from everything around us. She licks her top lip and speaks, her voice slightly hoarse, as if it has been hours since she last made a sound. We should go, she says, but she doesn't step back or begin to walk. Okay, I say, if you like. My father will be worried. Okay, it was lovely to come here, she says. I know, thank you for bringing me. She nods, turns, and leads me back to the olive grove. As soon as we get there, Leela's father points to his watch and indicates that it's time to leave. He mutters some harsh words at Leela, but she only shrugs. It's clear that we stayed longer than we were supposed to, and that he's cross about it and that Leela doesn't really care. We walk back towards Amaris together, but as soon as the town comes into view, Leela's father stops and shoos me away. Not safe, he says. You go ahead. He responds to my goodbye with nothing more than a nod. I look at Leela and it seems excruciating that now, because her father is there, I will have to leave without kissing her. I had my chance and it passed, and perhaps it will never come again. Bye, I say. Bye, be careful, she says. And you? Go, says her father. Hurry. I do as I'm told and I walk on. Every time I turn around to check on them, they haven't moved. Even when they're far away, out of earshot, I can see them just standing there, patient and immobile, waiting for me to disappear. Only as I walk into Amadeus do I realise I still haven't asked his name.